Welcome to this video presentation showing an introduction to how equine embryo transfer can be performed. To begin with, the donor mare is inseminated following normal procedures and a thorough evaluation of ovulation time point. By approximately day 6 after ovulation, the embryo will reach the uterus, and approximately on day 7 or day 8 after ovulation, depending on the type of semen used, the embryo is of a sufficient size to be flushed. The flushing is performed by allowing the preheated flushing medium to run into the uterus, and when sufficient fluid is inside the uterus, it is allowed to drain out again through a filter collecting the embryo. Initially, the donor mare is prepared by cleaning the perineal area, and the flushing catheters and tubes are connected and filled with the preheated flushing medium. The pre-filled catheter is placed through the cervix. Then the cuff is inflated with sterile saline. As the catheter is in place, the preheated flushing medium is allowed to run into the uterus. Afterwards, the fluid is allowed to drain out again, going through a filter collecting the embryo. After the flushing, the filter is rinsed and emptied carefully into a petri dish to search for the embryo. The air bubbles are removed, and then the lines in the petri dish allows a systematic search for the embryo. As an embryo is found, 8 to 12 wells of holding medium is prepared for the washing of the embryo. Then the smaller day 7 embryos would be loaded into a straw connected to a syringe. However, the embryo in this presentation is a larger day 8 to 9 embryo, visible to the naked eye and too big for a straw. It is therefore handled with and loaded into an insemination pipette connected to a syringe. The embryo is moved to the holding medium and then washed 8 to 12 times. The washing is performed by moving the embryo to a new well with clean holding medium 8 to 12 times. The embryo is then loaded into the insemination pipette, surrounded by columns of air and clean holding medium. A clean sheath is then placed on the pipette and the embryo is ready for transfer. The next important part is the recipient. It is important that the recipient is well synchronized with the donor mare. The recipient should ovulate 1 day prior to or at the latest 3 days after the donor mare. The optimal recipient should be approximately same size as the donor mare. It should be easy to handle and in good physical condition, 3 to 12 years of age, and it should have completed 1 successful pregnancy and shown good maternal behavior. Importantly, the reproductive organs should be of normal and good anatomy, and the uterine environment should be healthy. If 1 or 2 recipients are available, they should be synchronized with the donor mare, for example with Regulate for 10 to 14 days, followed by prostaglandin. And if a herd of good recipients is available, the recipient is selected based on ovulation time point and the uterus. Due to the large size of the embryo in this presentation, it is transferred with an insemination pipette, but normally the smaller embryos would be loaded into a straw and then transferred with a pipette and stylet. The recipient is prepared with a tail bandage and washing of the perineal area. Then the insemination pipette with cover is introduced into the vagina, and before entering the cervical channel, the cover is withdrawn and only the pipette is introduced to the cervical channel to avoid dragging vaginal flora into the uterus. Then the embryo and surrounding medium is pushed into the uterus. And finally the pipette is withdrawn. After transferring the embryo, the insemination pipette and cover is checked thoroughly to avoid that the embryo is stuck within the pipette. Following the transfer, it is important to minimize the stress for the recipient to improve pregnancy outcome. And the recipient is given NSAIDs and maybe antibiotics and corticosteroids to prevent luteolysis and thereby early embryonic loss. Furthermore, the corpus luteum is evaluated with ultrasound. The size and structure of the corpus luteum is evaluated, and if color Doppler is available, the blood flow to the corpus luteum can be evaluated. Alternatively, progesterone in the blood can be measured to make sure that progesterone levels are adequate to maintain pregnancy. If the corpus luteum is weak or the serum progesterone level is below 4 nanogram per milliliter, the recipient should be supplemented with progestogens such as Regulate until day 90 to 120, where the placenta takes over progesterone production. Finally, pregnancy scan can be performed from day 12 to 15 after ovulation. I would like to acknowledge Mick Duggan and James Crabtree for performing the embryo transfer, and Emma Blundell and the team at Mount St. John for welcoming me.